Okay, good afternoon. My name is Elmore Alexander, and I'm your host for this Higher Education IT Meetup Pro session on COVID-19 and how it's affecting the infrastructure needs of colleges and universities. 2 weeks ago, we hosted a session with 3 college CIOs to discuss the changes that have occurred and are expected to occur on their campuses as a result of the coronavirus. The response was impressive. We heard from you that you'd like to see more of these sessions and to see a more interactive format. That's what we're going to try to accomplish with today's session. After brief comments from our panelists, we'll be going to you for comments and questions on the topic. Now, we're going to be experimenting with the technology in today's session, so please bear with us. Here's what our plan of action will be. After initial presentations from our panelists, we'll be going to you with 3 polls. We'll feed the results of those polls back to you and then use them later in our discussion. During the meetup today, use the chat function to comment and pose questions. We're monitoring chat, and we will use your chat comments to bring you into the conversation. Also, use the raised hands button if you want to make a comment or pose a question. Just keep in mind, this is our first time trying to manage a discussion with a group of this size. Our panelists today are Michael Ginsberg and Nuno Couto. Michael recently retired as Dean of the Business School at Worcester Polytechnical Institute. His service there followed his tenures as the Business Dean at Yeshiva University, American University, and the University of Delaware. He received his PhD in the Management of Technology from MIT. Nuno is the founder and managing partner of Optimal Campus Consulting Incorporated. He has over 20 years of experience managing IT infrastructure projects at schools as diverse as Northeastern, Boston College, and Harvard. He received his MBA with a specialization in high tech from Northeastern. Last week, Michael and Nuno posted a blog entitled "Too Many Buildings, Not Enough Bandwidth." We thought that would be an interesting starting point for today's conversation. And so, Michael, can I start with you for some initial comments?
Thank you, Elmore. I hope everybody can see this now. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to see. We've got quite a group here, and it seems to be growing continually. We all know that higher education institutions have experienced a significant degree of change this spring. Campuses closing out, classes going online, students nowhere to be seen. We believe that this is likely to persist. We're not going back to where we were anytime soon. And in fact, the change is probably going to increase. And that's going to have significant implications for infrastructure, both physical, technological, and human needs as well. So we're going to start off with a few thoughts we have about this, and then, as Elmore has said, we want to throw it out to you afterwards and really hear what you're thinking. What do you see? We've started with really 3 basic assumptions, that there are going to be lasting changes as a result of COVID-19, that online education, first of all, online education is going to continue, and it will grow at probably all institutions of higher education. Secondly, we now have staff who are working remotely, and that remote distributed staff is going to become the norm for at least some staff at probably all institutions. And faculty members who have always liked to stay out of the office as much as possible, I say this as a former faculty member, we'll probably find that this is the norm for most faculty members moving forward. Okay. If you accept those 3 assumptions, we're going to ask you in a couple of minutes if you do, then there's certain conclusions that we can draw. And the first is, what are institutions going to need that they may not have now? And it seems pretty obvious that they're going to need greater bandwidth, more telecommunications infrastructure than they've had before. Secondly, if if we're going to move to online education, what we have done, what most institutions have done this spring, is a Band-Aid approach, and it's not going to be acceptable in the long run. You hear news stories about that every day. So we are going to have richer, more robust tools, and more robust environment for online education. In order to support all those remote workers, we're going to need better tools for communication, coordination, and collaboration. And I think that as we move to predominantly online education, we're going to need a different mix of skills in the faculty. And one of the things I'm sure that we're going to need as we move in this direction is additional instructional designers. Without identifying the school, I noted in the blog that we wrote a week or so ago that WPI, when I left in February, had one instructional designer for the entire institution. Okay. That isn't going to do it as we move further. So Nuno, would you like to take over?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Michael, for those comments, and thanks everyone for joining as well. As Michael said, my background is more on the technology side, working with various universities for about 12 years or so. But I would agree, obviously, with Michael and his comments. My conversations with various universities, and even being involved right now in a very large project to migrate a very large university to a better, more robust platform. I mean, everything is happening so quickly. Some of the things you see on the screen are, relatively obvious, but I think one I mention especially is the digitalization of paper-based processes. What's going on right now is not just about moving online the learning, it's moving online all processes. Universities are looking across the board at what's being done right now that hasn't been automated, that hasn't been put online, and how do we do that really, really quickly. I know of universities that have literally moved those sorts of processes, dozens, online within a week or so. But there are obviously other items beyond those listed here that may not be as obvious, but are being discussed at various universities. For example, the building online student communities, the differentiation that each university brings to the table somehow needs to be brought online. And how do you do that? How do you put student communities online? And universities are really grappling with this. Does this mean using virtual reality? Does it just mean using some sort of chat functionality like Yammer? So some items that are actually not listed on the screen right now are remote laboratory equipment. How do you get your labs done? Beyond virtual reality, just augmented reality in general. And there's one university actually talking about telepresence robots for graduation or teaching. Arizona State is doing that. The virtual tour software, obviously lots of people are using that these days. And if a system is not on the cloud, there's extra incentive these days to move it onto the cloud. You don't want people on site to be running software in your data center. You want to be able to do everything remotely and off premises as much as possible. One that maybe not too many have heard of is 3D printing. There's an increased need for 3D printing. Why? Because sometimes you can't order the item, you have to make it. You have to print it on premises. How about extra computing power for supporting COVID-19 research? A lot of the bigger research universities are having to implement those very, very quickly. Adding hardware to every classroom. I mean, universities have had to take classrooms, hundreds of classrooms that were somewhat ill-equipped with, in terms of hardware for classes, for remote classes, and very quickly have. And sometimes, how do you get that hardware quickly when everybody else is ordering that same sort of hardware? just move on to the next slide if you wouldn't mind.
Got it.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Michael. And these are some of the obvious things that are not needed. You don't need as many buildings. You don't need as many classrooms or lecture halls. You don't need as many offices. You don't need the dormitories. And unfortunately, you don't need as many staff for food services, for custodian type of functions, for police and security on campus, for maintenance. You know, lots of people are being affected. What do you do? What do you do with those people? So I've just some thoughts from the article, as well as other research and conversation with quite a few universities about some of the struggles they're having. Most of this is probably not new to you, but hopefully it begins the conversation.
Thank you, Nuno and Michael. Those are some interesting observations, and I think does give us a place to get started here. We thought it would be interesting to get some feedback from those of you in the audience, though, right now, and about your reactions to the changing infrastructure needs. And so we're going to post several questions for your reactions. So respond to those as we pop those polls up on the screen in front of you. We'll compile the results, and then we'll draw back into that in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, let me follow back up with Michael and with Nuno. Michael, in terms of your comments, what do you think the most pressing academic needs are going to be in this infrastructure conversion that you're anticipating?
So I think the most, I don't know if it's the most pressing, but the most difficult is going to be upgrading the online learning environment and processes and that includes not just software and hardware, but faculty skills, course redesign. If you're going to do truly high quality online learning, you do it differently than just taking your lectures and turning them into Zoom discussions, and that's going to require instructional designers, videographers, etc. So I think that's the biggest challenge for many universities.
Well, that's going to also take some real different skill levels of faculty members too.
I did say that.
Yeah.
And yes, I agree 100%. The other challenge that I think that most universities are going to have, particularly if there is there's some return to on-campus, and we've seen that some schools are trying to do this. Hampshire announced, I think yesterday or the day before, Hampshire College, that they will be back on campus this fall. And they, in fact, talked about some of this. You're going to have to repurpose, reconfigure all that space. There will not be any 200-person lecture halls anymore. Every classroom where we have tried to pack students in as closely as possible. You know, if the classroom had 30 seats, we put 30 students in there. They're not going to be 6 feet apart if you do that. And so we're going to have to reconfigure classrooms. It's going to be quite a bit different than the use of physical facilities.
Okay, interesting. Nuno, let me twist it a little bit differently to you then. What about the technology side? What do you think is the most difficult technology change that universities are going to face in the fall?
You know, it's hard to pinpoint one technology, and I'll tell you why. The success of the universities in moving online is going to be not just turning on online or turning on online to a greater degree. It's going to be asking, what is our value proposition and our differentiation? What are we known for? And then the question becomes, how do we do that online? How do we take our value proposition, what we're known for, and do that online? And that's a really big challenge, and that involves a lot of technologies. In particular, how do I create those online communities with students? What technologies am I going to use? Certainly the LMSs, the Blackboards, and the Canvases of the world are part of that, but that doesn't fulfill the mental health and social needs of students or staff. So how do you answer those questions? I was in a call with a president of a large university recently, and that is what he identified as the biggest challenge, and I completely agree. And honestly, he did something I thought was very wise. He asked every member of the organization, every member of the IT organization, because that's who he was talking to at the time, to think about that, and to collaboratively come up with suggestions and recommendations. I don't think this is something that can be handled by just one organization, one person. I think it requires a conversation. At our last meetup, one faculty member had actually mentioned that their university was looking at VR type of solutions that would replicate the student experience, including walking around on campus and having conversations with their friends, having themselves as an avatar. So some universities are going to that extent. It's really interesting to hear what other people are doing in the audience so that others could probably learn from it.
Yeah, that is going to be interesting. Okay, well, we've now got the beginnings of some of the poll results. And so I think you can see there that what we get, 71% of you agree with the three assumptions. 13% think that online education will increase. So there's pretty much consensus in that respect. If we look down here at the second question, in terms of unanticipated IT expenditures, the bandwidth was there, but laptop computers was the highest. Also a lot of remote high-speed internet connections, and we all heard people talking about hotspots, and then the training out there for faculty members. And then third, do people anticipate? Looks like the laptops and Chromebooks are really going to be the interesting points that will be coming up in that point. So we do have some real consensus then, I think, in terms of those ideas. Michael, do you want to react to what you see there in the polling of our audience?
Well, I'm glad to see that there seems to be fairly strong agreement with our three basic assumptions, because the conclusions would not follow without those assumptions. And I'm interested in hearing what some of the members of some of the other people have to say, rather than what I have to say about this. I think that's a good point to make. So folks, if you can, through the chat function, fire questions out there, then we will try to pick up on those questions. The question that is popping up right now from a number of folks is, how do you provide the interactive experience when students could go anywhere? And I assume by that they mean to any other school. You guys want to make an initial stab at that, and then we'll see. That's were you asking us?
Yeah, from Joseph Lacasio, from people across time zones. How are we going to deal with that kind of strategy?
To create the interactive experience?
Yes.
So I have done this before when at several of the institutions I worked where we had joint projects with students done, some of them in the US, some of them somewhere in Europe, and it was actually quite effective. That they formed teams. In one case, we did this with students from Cleveland and students from Moscow, and they formed fairly cohesive consulting teams that they got together at the end to physically meet one another. But I think it is entirely possible to create that. If the technology will allow us to do a great deal, but we need to figure out how to use it and how to do it differently. Okay. Nuno, did you want to add to that?
I'd love to hear certainly from the audience. It'd be awesome if the audience answers the audience's questions too. so we can get some conversation. But I think that universities can learn a lot from entrepreneurs. So look at the technologies and the processes that your entrepreneurial students are using right now. How are they doing it? They're collaborating across campus. They're collaborating across the country. They're collaborating across the world. Ask them, look at them for what's working. And that might be different from university to university. VR technology or something to replicate an online campus may or may not be. Ask your students. In the end, ask your students is my recommendation.
Okay. I think we've got Tom. I think we've got a question from Derek Gibson out there. And Derek, I believe you're unmuted. So if you've got a comment. Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph Lacasio. We've got you unmuted and on video. I hear you've got a comment.
Yeah, so I work at Wheaton College up here in the Northeast. It's a private liberal arts college, and the hallmark of the Wheaton education is literally hand in hand with faculty and students. And we do an exceptional job in that realm. When I got my MBA in IT, it was online, it was very highly developed, and I did exactly what one of the colleagues here said. I met with students at all different hours when I was meeting with students, but to provide that very specific private liberal arts education that Wheaton does, it's not going to be successful online. So I'm not asking how to solve that. That's something that many private liberal arts colleges have to solve. And the students aren't taught by even graduate students. They are taught by working side by side with faculty in very small class sizes. So although I don't disagree that this is the model that many schools or education in general will move to, it's going to make it that much more difficult from a business perspective for some institutions.
Yeah. Joseph, I know you guys had a faculty meeting about 2 Mondays ago with your president, Dennis Hanno, talking about that very issue. And my understanding is he reached out to the faculty and said, we need to get students back on campus. How can we do it? Any insights you can give us as to how that conversation went with President Hanno?
Well, we did a couple of things. We extended our deadlines from May till June 1st. And what's kind of funny about that is many institutions did not, but they're still accepting students well after their May 1st deadline. And I assume they'll be accepting students well into September. I wouldn't be surprised. It's a challenge. The supply chain itself is going to be a challenge. Wheaton is not a school that does online classes. Although we do a small handful during the summertime, we don't have a full-blown summer semester. And a number of students will sign up for those, but our classrooms aren't really equipped to record video, and just supply chain and trying to get that infrastructure in place is going to be tough. Just as an example, we ordered Dell laptops 2 months ago. They're just coming in now.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet we couldn't get cameras if we wanted to right now in time for the fall.
Yeah.
So, I'm in charge of all of the IT at the college, but I'm not responsible, thankfully at this point, for the technology that's in the classrooms. That falls under the library and in that area for the college. I've got my hands full just trying to get all the students, academic software, faculty, and staff all able to effectively work remotely, which we've done. But mark my words, I attended my MBA in a program built from the ground up for online. And what we've provided in an emergency situation is not going to meet the expectations of students and faculty. That's not something you're going to build in a month or two.
That's a good point. Derek Gibson is out there with some comments, I believe, with regard to private clouds and doing things. Derek, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I can come in. I'm just wondering what institutions are doing, retooling their staffing. I came from a private sector background where we were building like OpenStack infrastructure and stuff like that. But rather than moving our stuff to the cloud, we need to be looking at what can we do with the infrastructure we already have and moving that in a cloud accessibility or into the DMZ with zero trust so that we can still manage it, but do that without going out and spending that money in the cloud, because a lot of the times those costs are gray because you don't know how much ingress or egress of data that's going to have. You know, those compute resources are finite, but there's a lot of different factors there to consider.
You know, any observations you have there from what you've been observing with some pretty big institutions recently?
From a staffing standpoint, in terms of retooling, it's just more and more instructional designers. There's a big difference, as was mentioned earlier, between remote, turning on remote learning and having truly built from the ground up online learning. And some universities are doing the best that they can, especially those that are in the midst of migrating LMSs or upgrading LMSs. So that's a big trend that I see. Lots of instructional designers being hired. In terms of the, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In terms of the hardware, I'm just seeing data centers become smaller and smaller. And internal on-premise data centers. Lots and lots, this is not news probably to anyone, but lots and lots of vendor product, off-the-shelf, vanilla implementation.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question out there from Deanna, and Deanna, I'm going to butcher your last name, Taser. And so can we go to you for that? Yeah, there you are.
Sorry, I was on mute, so hopefully, can you guys hear me all right?
We can hear you fine. Go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, well, I work with a lot of universities around expert systems, and we've seen a lot of pickup. And I was just curious on, you know, if from a priority perspective, I mean, that's a big deal around reputation and engagement and academic pages. And I was curious how people were managing that. You know, is it something that maybe is just defocused right now because there's so many other infrastructure needs, or as fall comes about, are there different systems being used, like your CMS, and how they're tackling that? Because when we're sitting down with universities, it seems to be a bit of a panic area where there's a disconnect. So I was just curious if anybody had any experience with that.
Okay. Any thoughts on that from anyone? I'll look to you real quickly. Oh yeah, Joseph, go ahead. Come in.
I don't want to take up the whole conversation here. I've been at Wheaton College for almost 30 years now, and I've been working in IT for longer than that. All shift in higher ed has gone on for a while. We are all moving. You know, when I first got to Wheaton, it was a turnkey solution on campus, and over the last 2 decades, everything that we do now is software as a service, whether it's Slate for recruitment. You know, if you think of the incoming students, you need a customer relationship management system there. When they become alums, you need a CRM there. It's still the student information system that it's either going to be in the cloud or still on campus. Ours is still on campus. So to me, the gold standard today is not so much where it is. I mean, I want to get rid of my 2 data centers, get them in the cloud. I don't want to pay people to manage that. What I need help with is I need a way to integrate all these systems, because every cloud vendor has their own proprietary way, APIs or not, of how to get data in and out of that system. And I don't care if you're looking at SnapLogic, if you're using Razor's Edge, they got their own Omatic way of doing things that's proprietary. You know, half of our systems now are in the cloud, half of them are still on campus. It doesn't matter where they are, all the data needs to flow together, because there's not a turnkey solution that does everything. That's the real challenge. As I talk to CIOs in different groups around the country, we're all struggling with the integration aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let me take a little pivot. Lee Krause is out there, and Lee has a question with regard to responding to students from under-resourced areas. Lee, can you come in with your comment?
Sure. And I was responding to, I guess it was Joseph, while we're not a small private liberal arts, we are a mid-sized public HBCU, and we have a similar mission here. Truth and Service is our founder's motto, and a lot of that comes from that very face-to-face requirement. We are 75% Pell eligible here at NCCU, and as a result, I've been shipping Chromebooks out because we could not locate laptops.
Yeah.
That required us to upgrade our virtual desktop environment so the students could get access to the solutions that they needed. So I feel we are in negotiations right now to expand into the VMware Horizon Cloud, where I can play both sides of that. We looked at a lot of solutions that were talked about on the CIO list, the EDUCAUSE CIO list, and that's been really helpful. But I think that one of our challenges in this area is to not lose faith, not lose who we are as institutions by overwhelming our campus with technology. I have never been appreciated. My team has never been appreciated like they've been in the last 2 months. The email thank yous that we've been getting, we laid all this in place, hoping that change would happen. This is not the change any of us ever wanted in this way. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is going to, in my opinion, do what we've always asked. I've always asked faculty to push us into technologies. Let us know what you need, because it shouldn't be driven. We shouldn't do things to you. We should do it for you.
So be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. But I'm really excited for the conversation. We have faculty using, again, we call it Eagle Apps, our virtual desktop environment, and the numbers are astronomical. Our WebEx numbers, I had to get 3 people to check my math for our Board of Trustee meeting. Our WebEx numbers went up 25,000%. That was possible. It went from basically non-existent to thousands of meetings and hours in a month. Our help desk during spring break, our help desk hours went up 200%.
Wow.
I think we're still providing that service, but my question is, for those of us in technology, how do we continue to provide the technology, but allowing the institution's mission, which will include transforming young people? How do we not get the technology in the way of that transformation? And do we continue to have the technology support that transformation?
That's a very interesting question. Michael, can I come over to you of having implemented systems at multiple places? How do you keep the technology from destroying the learning?
I guess a certain amount of it is luck, but it's thinking about it ahead of time. I was going to ask a question which may partially address this. What we have done at my most recent employer is moved some of our programs completely, not online, but to hybrid courses. So there was a portion of the time that you were online and a portion of the time that you were on campus, on the ground. It would seem to me that has some real potential for 2 things. One is continuing the physical interaction among students and between students and faculty, but also helps with the utilization of facilities where we need to probably reduce the intensity of facility utilization. So if you're only on campus half the time, then perhaps we can move that would help with the facility utilization as well.
Well, that's a real interesting point. And Matt Hoffman out there is making comments about the idea of Zoom rooms. Matt, can I come to you to talk about how you guys have used Zoom rooms? Because it seems to me that also gets at what Michael's talking about there in terms of blending and keeping people involved.
Yeah, this is Matt. I mentioned something about cloud phones. I don't remember seeing anything about Zoom rooms unless that was somebody else. But we do have Zoom rooms. I mean, we have 8 of them. So we're looking to implement probably more of those and use some of the funding we're getting to implement more Zoom rooms and do classrooms that some folks will be in this classroom, some folks will be at home. But we are actually narrowing down our selection for the cloud phone system that we're looking to implement. We've done a 2-month, probably even longer evaluation, and we're kind of narrowing down on a solution that we hope to have deployed here in another month or two.
How do you expect that that's going to have an impact on the interaction? Are you trying to maintain, and sort of the same way Michael was talking about, trying to maintain high touch in the face of the high tech?
Sorry, I didn't know my camera was on. There we go. As far as touching the, being able to do more with the students, the new cloud phone system will allow us to text students from our landline number. So we won't have to give our cell phone numbers out to students. We can text back and forth and have a collaboration with them. We do use a tool called Signalvine right now to reach students. That works really well for us. So we're looking to do that. We have an on-prem solution now using Cisco Call Manager. The system is complex. The soft phone solution is just deprecated, and we actually took classroom phones offline so we can utilize licenses for more soft phone licenses. So it's worked for us for the time being, but I think moving forward, we want to get to something that has a client that can work on any device. I probably won't have a desk phone anymore once we go to this too. Being able to answer my work phone on my cell phone and any kind of options that I want. There's so many different options to it. It provides more collaboration, video conferencing, flipping a call to a video conference call and stuff like that. So that's kind of where we're looking at being able to collaborate better.
Sounds interesting. Lee, I think you had a comment you were ready to make.
Yeah, thank you. I did want to say that, I don't know if you see dog. I did want to say that one of the things we're looking at doing at NCCU is because we have had a classroom standard of having cameras and set up for doing WebEx as our standard on campus in our classroom, that our faculty and deans are meeting right now to decide if we do Monday, half the students come to class, Wednesday, the other half of students come to class. So it's a bizarre ultra face-to-face hybrid, because we are welcoming students back to campus. The entire UNC system is open for fall 2020. So all 17 campuses will be, and they're big ones, Chapel Hill and State involved in this, UNC Charlotte with their 60,000, there's a lot of big campuses. So we can continue to social distance, but give our students that high touch from a socially distant, appropriate place.
Yes.
Expectation. And so we've been talking about that, and then converting some of our larger classrooms. A classroom of 75 now becomes an appropriate classroom for 25, where you can socially distance, and then still do the thing that we don't have. We have, of course, WebEx recording, but we'll have to add classroom capture into that, so that we also have that for students who can't attend or having other problems with technology if that happens. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. Now, Kevin Broussard is out there, and he has actually had some experience recently using the HyFlex course offerings. Kevin, can you give us some insight as to what that experience is like?
Yeah, certainly. Our graduate program had been completely HyFlex to begin with. So we had, a small, our graduate program is not very large, but certainly all the technical challenge we've had with understanding use of the LMS as well as other products, and then we settled in on Zoom, which has been very good. So we had a small foundation of that. So when we had to go to the remote learning model, essentially we just expanded upon that. And the nice thing there, honestly, and you all know this, is collaboration with the faculty. We had a very, very strong relationship with our faculty. So there was a lot of networking to help each other learn how to best optimize use of Zoom, the breakout rooms, and honestly, our statistics show our attendance with our Zoom classes with students coming in from home is higher than the attendance of classes in person on campus.
That's amazing.
And it's very interesting because I participated as a guest speaker in one class, and And it's interesting to see in situations like this where you see kids lying in bed, obviously with their laptop on their end table, but they're still engaged, right? They're not just falling asleep. They're actually engaged. They're obviously more comfortable in their own situation. And all in all, our students have found it not lacking all that much from the in-class session. Their main complaint is if you got back-to-back-to-back courses, like Monday morning from 8 to 12, you're sitting in front of your computer for 4 hours. And that's honestly the biggest challenge, is even for all of us, I would imagine. I know I find myself sitting in front of my computer a lot more than getting up and walking around. So your brain gets a little stopped.
Well,
but overall, Zoom has been, for all its challenges with what you read about, we've been very, very happy with how it's worked with our faculty-student dynamic.
That sounds good. You know, I suspect yesterday's Supreme Court session will go down in history as an example of what we're doing at this point in time. From the engagement of Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas, who hardly ever has asked questions and was as participative as anyone yesterday, and then the infamous flush of the toilet that happened during that session. But it certainly gets at exactly what you're talking about. And if it, to me, it's sort of fascinating. Not only does it affect that 18-year-old college student, but it affected these, some of the most learned minds in our country in terms of their involvement. Michael, I think you were ready to jump in and push the conversation in a little bit different direction.
Well, I have a question, and this is not to be a commercial advertisement, but does anyone have any experience with courses offered through 2U? 2U, do you all know who 2U is? Probably one of the premier platform providers for online education. And I've done some work with them. I've never had a contract with them, but we did some work with them trying to set up programs when I was at a previous employer. And it is all right, so Deanne has a response. So if you've got can you say something about the experience?
You're unmuted.
So I was going to say, just getting off of mute. I know I was going back and forth there. Yeah, absolutely. I know 2U also bought out another learning management system as well. I'm trying to recall the name. They're also wonderful. The 2U crew are incredibly professional at what they do, and their service offering is, bar none, one of the best I've seen, to be honest with you. And they've been around for quite some time. So, I mean, my feedback is it's definitely a really good platform, and it's well-founded, and they actually use the education community to keep building it out and evolving it.
Okay, that's interesting. We certainly think, and we were talking to another vendor just in the last few days who's saying the interest that is coming at them to convert things for September is just gigantic.
Yeah.
I think, Andy Ferrier, there's a question out there and some conversation talking about testing. Can you follow up on the testing idea for us?
Yeah, that's something that has been hitting us quite a bit from our for testing on the entry side, even within the class itself. Is we only had so many licenses for systems like Honorlock proctoring. We're finding is if you want to use a solution like that, students require certain technology requirements. They require a camera, or they require other things that service to actually maintain. And at $5 per quiz, that gets or per session, that gets expensive real quick. Are y'all seeing other ways of that faculty are pursuing to do testing in those environments?
Yeah, let me jump in there, and I'm going to talk for just a second, and hopefully someone can pop in and Tom can point me in the direction. Okay, Tom has. Kevin Bassard, you've got some strategies for discounted Honorlock systems. Can you follow up there?
Oh, certainly. I won't say it's a strategy, but interestingly enough, I don't know how many folks are familiar with NERComp, which is the Northeast Regional Computing Program. So we actually provide discounted offerings from various vendors, and we just signed an agreement with Honorlock that provides fairly good discounts for their offerings. It's all on our website. Honestly, off the top of my head, I don't recall what all the specifics are, but as we talked to fellow schools in the consortium, they felt that the discounts were pretty good. You're not obviously giving it away by any means, but just as an FYI, because I am part of NERCOMP, so I'm familiar with this. People might not have heard about it.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to the issue, and I've heard this from a lot of CIOs. I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago in the session, that this is a time to negotiate with these vendors, that both the volume is increasing, that makes things attractive to them, but secondly, they're all looking to be the ones that get their foot in the door. And so it's a time to negotiate and conceivably negotiate successfully in that respect. James, can I come to you? You were ready to join us.
In regards to how we're handling quizzes and stuff like that?
Yes.
So basically we use Moodle. Obviously, we're a nonprofit association, so that allows us to try to keep our costs down. So we end up taking the cost saved on an LMS and we put it towards what we find is valid plugins for the Moodle environment. One being Poodle, which I posted a link up in the chat, but we also do quizzes and grading. So we're looking right now at either two scenarios for the fall. Either we're going to do HyFlex or we're going to do 100% online. So with the HyFlex, it allows us to, even if a student had limited technology in the sense that they maybe didn't have a video, or maybe they had just even a cell phone for just mic communication, at least the teacher can direct them to say, well, if you click on the link and take a quick quiz, then we can then come back to that. And they've done a pilot about a month and a half or so ago with some students that were abroad, and it only lasted about 2 weeks, but they found that it was much easier, the students, because they were more tech savvy than even the teachers. So sometimes the teachers were pretty much thinking they were still waiting, and all the students had already finished either the quizzes, the queuing, the polling, and all that. So I don't think students are going to have as much as an issue coming on doing hybrid classes as much as the faculty are going to.
Mm-hmm. Nuno, have you observed any particular, you've been working recently with a couple of very large universities. Are they going at this any differently at this point? Or is this just not right there on their time horizon at this point?
In terms of the quizzes?
Yes.
They're using basically whatever can be integrated into their LMS. Mm-hmm. They're using what's called learning technology, LTIs, learning technology integrations, and there are various ones out there, but really, that's my experience mostly.
Okay. Okay. I think there's Terrence Ma has a perspective from medical school strategies. Terrence, can I come to you on that?
Sure. I'm a consultant, and I used to work in medical education a lot. And I've been following my colleagues and other medical schools. Most medical schools use a specific product, which now offers online proctoring. However, many medical schools are reporting that their exams currently are unproctored, but the distribution of results are similar to prior years, as well as prior to when the students were at home, suggesting that at least the distribution is the same. So if it's the same, then it suggests that there might not be any cheating going on, at least with this particular population of students, where there is a great concern that there's always cheating going on, because medical students are known as very cutthroat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly we saw here in Boston with the Boston University situation, and they're investigating something there. So it's not going to go away or change in that respect. Well, we're coming up on the end of the hour, and I'm not getting any indication from the chat that there's other comments out there. Let me take just a moment and come back to first Michael and then Nuno for a last couple of comments before we wrap this up. So Michael, come first to you.
Okay, thanks, Elmore. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, and there's obviously much to talk about. We generally are in agreement that the changes are here and they're here to stay. We're going to need to adapt. The universities are going to, colleges and universities are going to need to adapt. Normal will not be the same. Certainly not this year, and I think it'll probably be a long time before it looks like it looked as recently as last fall. Interesting to hear some of the challenges, and I think one of the real ones is, in fact, Elmore wrote about this last week or so. How do you maintain that intimate person-to-person environment culture that who talked at somebody, I'm sorry, I missed it, who talked about that before at Wheaton, and at other Joseph, okay, and at other institutions as well. Leah talked about it at North Carolina Central, if I caught where you are. The other one of the other challenges that's interesting to hear about and to realize is the whole issue of how do you get the technology you need now? That if suddenly the world needs or universities need 3 times as many laptops as they did before, they don't just drop down from heaven. So finishing on a good note, it was nice to hear that IT has become heroic, perhaps of necessity, and I think that's going to continue to be the case, that IT will remain overworked heroes.
Okay, good. Nuno, last comment from you. What jumped out at you during our discussion this afternoon?
A couple of things. And one of them is that there are no easy answers to a lot of these challenges. And I think it's so extremely beneficial to have these sorts of conversations and to learn from each other. You know, I'm a consultant, but why? Don't pay me. If you can help it, don't pay me. Learn, do this. Have these conversations and learn from who's really out there, and doing it and trying different things and being creative. I would say also think very entrepreneurially. This is going to require some very, very creative thinking. Mm-hmm. And focus on, okay, specifically what is our value proposition and how do we not lose it when as we move more and more online. And I would say one thing that I see in most of my projects is that students are not sufficiently involved. Whatever the implementation of the product is, they're affected, but they're not asked a lot of questions. Involve them, ask them. They're ultimately the customers, right? Or at least one of the customers, one of the sets of customers.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael and Nuno, for getting this started and helping us roll along. Thank all of you who have been a part of this discussion. It's fascinating to me, and I hope was helpful to everyone else. There will be a questionnaire coming out to you momentarily. Give us feedback on that as to what you think is useful, what we might do to keep this conversation going. As I said earlier, we've never tried this before, and we were scrambling behind the scenes trying to work it out, sometimes rather poorly, I fear. But hopefully this provided a modality other than just going on that webinar where folks are talking at you to try and engage conversation of a larger group, and I felt that was good. Back on the Meetup page, there's a discussion board and a comment section that is there, and please use that. We're monitoring that, and we'll use that to figure out what to do. And unless we see things differently, we're going to look at and try to put together another one of these, possibly within the next 2 weeks or at the 2-week point, just as we did at this point. So again, thank you. And of course, let me finally finish it off with one, I guess, humorous comment, and that is that it ain't just the laptops that folks can't get. I've been trying since last night when the golf courses reopened to get a pull cart, since we're not going to be able to ride anymore. And there are no pull carts available in Massachusetts right now. I placed an order from Quebec this morning, and they assured me that within a week to 10 days, they would have a pull card in my hands. We'll see if they can get it across the U.S.-Canadian border. It's different times, folks, that we're living with, but it's darn impressive to see what IT folks are doing to make a difference in that. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for participating, and we hope to see you back here in the near future. Good afternoon.